The world had fractured, splintered by the relentless hammers of conflict, leaving behind a scarred and desolate landscape. Across the Western Front, the Grim Reaper harvested souls with brutal efficiency, painting the earth crimson beneath a perpetually bruised sky. This was the Second World War, a crucible that forged heroes and swallowed countless others into its churning maw of destruction. Amidst the chaos, a singular story emerged, a whispered legend of a rookie left behind, his actions initially met with derision, only later to be understood as an act of profound, unexpected heroism that defied all expectations. What extraordinary deed could a single, unassuming soldier accomplish, abandoned in the shadow of war, that would later rewrite the narrative of courage? Enter Private Thomas. He was a whisper in a storm, a quiet shadow moving among giants. Fresh-faced and barely out of his teens, Thomas was the newest, and arguably the most out of place, member of a seasoned reconnaissance unit. His comrades were hardened men, etched with the lines of countless battles, their eyes reflecting the perpetual twilight of war. Thomas, in contrast, possessed an almost ethereal calm, a contemplative gaze that seemed to linger on the beauty of a shattered tree rather than the strategic advantage of its broken branches. His hands, though capable, seemed more suited for holding a brush or turning the pages of a worn book than clutching a rifle. There were whispers about his past, a life far removed from the mud and blood, perhaps an artist captivated by the play of light, or a scholar lost in ancient texts. He moved through the trenches with a quiet grace, often overlooked, frequently underestimated. His presence was a subtle incongruity in the brutal symphony of the Western Front. A critical mission loomed, its shadow stretching long across their makeshift camp. The unit was tasked with scouting a heavily fortified enemy position, a suicide run in all but name. A palpable tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating, as preparations were made. Weapons were checked, maps unfolded, and orders barked with a grim urgency. As the seasoned men geared up, their faces set in grim determination, the unit commander, a man named Sergeant Miller whose voice was as gravelly as the trench floor, turned to Thomas. "Private," he grunted, his eyes assessing, then dismissing. "You'll stay behind. Monitor the rear outpost. Keep an eye on supply lines, report anything unusual." It was a seemingly minor, almost insulting task, a clear indicator that he wasn't considered fit for the perilous recon. The outpost was a forgotten speck on the map, far from the direct action, a place where nothing ever happened. A ripple of muted snickers went through the unit. "Good old Thomas, always on duty," one soldier muttered under his breath, earning a quick shove from another. "Wouldn't want him tripping over his own feet out there, eh?" Another chuckled, loud enough to be heard. Their dismissive remarks, veiled in forced camaraderie, were like tiny barbs, implying he lacked the mettle for real combat. They saw his quiet nature as timidity, his thoughtfulness as hesitation. He was the rookie, the greenhorn, the one who wasn't cut out for the brutal necessities of war, and this minor assignment seemed to confirm their every prejudice. Thomas felt the sting of their words, the weight of their judgment, but his face remained impassive. He simply nodded, a flicker of something unreadable, not resignation, but perhaps a profound understanding, in his deep-set eyes. He took the order without complaint, without a word of protest. He understood the strategic value of his assignment, even if his comrades, blinded by their own preconceptions, could not. What they saw as a demotion, he perceived as an opportunity, a shift in perspective. He knew, with an instinct no one else possessed, that sometimes the true battle was fought not on the front lines, but in the unseen spaces, in the silent details that others overlooked. He had a peculiar habit, a quiet dedication to mapping out the terrain, not just with lines and grids, but with observations of natural patterns, the subtle whispers of the environment. Sergeant Miller, oblivious to the hidden depth before him, gave a final, curt nod. "Move out," he commanded, and the unit melted into the pre-dawn gloom, leaving Thomas alone. His extraordinary journey, one that would redefine courage and heroism, was about to begin. If you're intrigued by the untold stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things in the face of impossible odds, then you won't want to miss how Thomas's story unfolds. Make sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who appreciates unsung heroes, and subscribe to our channel to follow Private Thomas's unexpected path. The main unit departed, their forms swallowed by the pre-dawn mist, leaving Thomas utterly alone at the desolate outpost. The silence that descended after their departure was profound, almost deafening, broken only by the distant, muffled echoes of battle, a morbid heartbeat across the scarred landscape, and the restless sigh of the wind whispering through skeletal trees. He was isolated, not just from his comrades, but from the familiar clamor of the front lines, facing not only the omnipresent threat of the enemy, but also the haunting, oppressive quiet that seemed to amplify every internal doubt. The vast emptiness stretched before him, a canvas waiting for the brushstrokes of impending danger. Instead of merely monitoring, as Sergeant Miller had instructed, Thomas began an unusually meticulous observation of his surroundings. This wasn't a casual glance. It was an immersion, a deep dive into the minutiae of the environment. He noticed details that any other soldier, hardened by direct combat, might overlook entirely, considering them irrelevant amidst the larger, more obvious threats. Thomas saw the subtle shift in the trajectory of a flock of birds, not random flight, but a sudden, synchronized swerve that suggested unseen movement below. He detected the faint, almost imperceptible discoloration of a patch of earth near a cluster of old growth, a telltale sign of recent disturbance. There were discarded cigarette butts too fresh to be old, yet too carefully placed to be accidental, along a rarely used deer trail. He picked up on unusual patterns in the distant enemy patrol routes, a deviation from their established clockwork precision. Even the whisper of the wind seemed to carry faint, rhythmic sounds that were not natural, like the muted thud of boots on soft ground, or the rhythmic clang of equipment. Through this relentless, almost obsessive observation, Thomas began to piece together a disquieting puzzle. He detected a new, unexpected threat, a flanking maneuver by enemy forces, far more significant and covert than anyone had anticipated. They were not merely probing. They were aiming to encircle his unit's primary objective, a pincer movement designed to cut off retreat and overwhelm them completely. This threat was initially almost imperceptible, a ghost in the periphery of his awareness, but with every passing minute, every minute detail Thomas catalogued, it solidified into a chilling reality. The enemy's advance was cunningly disguised, utilizing the natural terrain and the covering darkness of night to move with an almost supernatural stealth. The main obstacle wasn't a single, identifiable antagonist, but the overwhelming, methodical efficiency of the enemy's hidden advance, combined with the severe communication limitations inherent to the era. The rudimentary radio equipment crackled with static, a frustrating roar standing between him and his unit. How could he possibly warn them in time? The distance was too great for any vocal alarm, and shouting would only expose his position and alert the enemy to his discovery, potentially jeopardizing both himself and his distant comrades. Thomas immediately tried to establish contact with his unit via the cumbersome, unreliable radio equipment. He cranked the generator, adjusted the dials, his fingers dancing across the cold metal, but the airwaves remained a tempest of interference. Static, like 1,000 angry wasps, filled his ears, rendering any coordinated message useless. He attempted to signal, to use flares, anything to draw attention, but the stealth of the enemy's movement meant any overt action would instantly expose his position. He couldn't risk alerting them to his presence before he had a concrete plan. The overwhelming enemy presence, now closer, more tangible, made any direct intervention unthinkable. The enemy's flanking movement became dramatically more pronounced as the hours ticked by. Thomas could now discern individual figures, their silhouettes stark against the emerging dawn, their numbers far greater than his initial, cautious estimates. They were moving with a chilling purpose, a silent, deadly river flowing towards his unsuspecting unit. A cold dread seeped into Thomas's core. He realized his comrades were walking into a meticulously laid trap, a slaughterhouse disguised as a strategic maneuver. He was the only one who saw it, the lone sentinel bearing witness to an impending catastrophe. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on him, a crushing burden of knowledge that gnawed at his gut. His methodical nature and meticulous attention to detail, previously seen as weaknesses by his boisterous comrades, were now his only strengths, his solitary arsenal against an overwhelming force. He closed his eyes for a moment, picturing the terrain, remembering every contour, every hidden path, every subtle landmark from his personal, detailed mental maps. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. He began to formulate a desperate plan, one that relied solely on his unique attributes, on the very idiosyncrasies that had made him an object of derision. This was not a plan for a soldier, but for an observer, a quiet scholar thrust into a brutal world, whose keen intellect was now the only thing standing between his unit and certain annihilation. The rhythmic thud of enemy boots, once muted and distant, now echoed with disquieting clarity through the crisp morning air. Thomas, peering through his binoculars, watched in horror as the enemy's flanking maneuver accelerated, their lines extending, a deadly net slowly closing. He could now see the individual faces, the glint of rifles, the methodical precision of their advance across the rugged terrain. The scale of the impending ambush was terrifyingly clear. His unit was not just walking into a trap, they were about to be swallowed whole, mere hours, if not minutes, from being completely overrun. The sheer numbers, the coordinated movement, revealed a tactical brilliance that filled him with dread for his unsuspecting comrades. There was no time left for conventional thought. Recognizing that radio communication was utterly impossible, and direct intervention suicidal, Thomas devised a desperate, unconventional method to warn his comrades. His plan leveraged his previously hinted at unique skill, an almost artistic ability to map and interpret the subtle cues of the natural world, transforming them into a language that only a trained eye, or specifically his unit, might understand. He would not scream a warning, he would carve it into the very landscape. His objective, to create a series of cryptic markers along the path his unit was expected to take, a silent cry for help embedded within the environment itself, a secret language whispered from the earth. He quickly gathered essential items, a small military-issued shovel, a canteen, a crude map he'd meticulously drawn of the local topography, and a handful of unusual, naturally occurring stones he'd collected over previous weeks, each with a distinct hue or shape that held personal significance to his observations. He embarked on a solo, perilous journey across the treacherous ground, moving with a ghost-like stealth that belied his earlier perceived clumsiness. He avoided enemy patrols with an instinctual grace, darting between shadows, crawling through dense undergrowth, his ears straining for any telltale sound. As he moved, he simultaneously implemented his warning system. He would carefully displace a rock, turning it to reveal a specific, less weathered side, creating an unnatural glint in the early morning sun. He scratched a distinct, almost imperceptible symbol into the bark of certain trees, a pattern only he and perhaps one or two of his comrades, who had seen him sketching similar motifs in his downtime, would recognize. He bent specific branches at odd angles, creating an artificial, yet subtle, directional arrow. Each mark was a breadcrumb, a silent signal, strategically placed but designed to blend seamlessly into the natural environment to avoid detection by the enemy. The journey was fraught with unimaginable danger. Every rustle of leaves, every distant bird call, sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. Physical exhaustion gnawed at his muscles, his lungs burned, and fear was a cold, constant companion. The constant threat of discovery loomed over him like a hungry predator. He faced difficult choices, prioritizing the message over his own safety. A slight detour to avoid a patrolling enemy squad cost him precious minutes, but ensured the integrity of his warning chain. He pushed past pain and fatigue, driven by the stark images of his comrades, oblivious to their fate, walking blindly into the enemy's maw. Each step was a calculated risk, a race against time, a desperate gamble for the lives of men who had laughed at him. The warning he created was not a direct message, no shouted, "Ambush ahead!" or glaring red flag. Instead, it was a series of cryptic markers, a visual lexicon drawn from his intimate knowledge of the terrain and his unique perception. A small pile of 3 specific stones, arranged in a triangular pattern, marked a deviation from the expected path. A particular type of moss, carefully scraped away from a tree trunk, revealed a lighter patch of bark, signifying danger to the left. A broken branch, snapped off and placed in an unnatural vertical position, indicated an enemy observation point. These were not random acts, they were a design narrative, a silent cry for help, painstakingly embedded within the very fabric of the environment, a message written in the earth itself, waiting for an interpreter. As he worked, a chilling doubt crept into his mind. Will his unit even notice his almost invisible warnings? Will they understand them, or simply dismiss them as natural irregularities? Will his subtle artistry be too subtle? The thought was a bitter pill, threatening to undermine his resolve. Yet the vivid images of his comrades, their faces etched with the grim lines of war, their lives hanging precariously in the balance, fueled his unwavering determination. He wouldn't let them march to their doom. He pressed on, his hands working furiously, his mind a whirlwind of tactical calculation and desperate hope. The sun was rising higher now, casting longer shadows, and the enemy's advance was relentless. He had done all he could. The sun was rising higher now, casting longer shadows, and the enemy's advance was relentless. He had done all he could. Meanwhile, Thomas's unit continued its mission, oblivious to the impending threat that Thomas had so meticulously uncovered. They pushed forward, a disciplined and hardened group, their boots crunching on the frosty earth, their minds solely focused on the primary objective, scouting the heavily fortified enemy position. Sergeant Miller, at the head of the column, consulted his map periodically, his brow furrowed in concentration. The men marched with a practiced rhythm, weapons at the ready, every sense alert for the anticipated dangers of their reconnaissance mission. They were nearing the ambush point, confident in their training and focused on the task at hand, utterly unaware of the deadly net tightening around them, or of the lone figure who had risked everything to warn them. The landscape, to their eyes, presented itself as a series of familiar challenges, inclines, dense thickets, and open stretches, all to be navigated with tactical precision. Then, the first subtle signs of Thomas's warning began to appear. Corporal Davies, a man with an uncanny eye for detail and a quiet affinity for Thomas despite their unit's general derision, was the first to notice something out of place. It wasn't an obvious signal, no glaring flag or shouted alarm, but a fleeting anomaly. As they moved past a cluster of stunted pines, Davies paused, his gaze drawn to a stone that seemed oddly positioned amongst the natural debris. It was a dark, flat stone, but it had been subtly turned to reveal a lighter, almost chalky underside, facing directly into their path. A displaced stone? Nothing more, but Davies's mind, always cataloging, registered the unnaturalness of it. A few hundred yards further, near a gnarled oak, he saw a small branch, not fallen, but deliberately snapped and angled in a way that mimicked an arrow, pointing vaguely to their left, away from their intended direction. The initial observations were quickly dismissed by the unit. "What's holding you up, Davies?" Sergeant Miller barked, impatience lacing his voice. Davies pointed to the stone, then the branch. "Just a bit odd, Sergeant. Doesn't sit right." Miller merely grunted. "Coincidence, Corporal. Wind, maybe a fox. Let's move. We have a schedule." The unit's leader, focused with tunnel vision on the main mission, urged them forward, inadvertently pushing them closer to the meticulously laid trap. Other soldiers glanced at Davies with mild amusement, attributing his caution to an overactive imagination. Their mission was clear, their path laid out. There was no room for vague superstitions or minor discrepancies in the natural order of things. But as they advanced, more of Thomas's subtle warnings appeared, growing in frequency and forming a discernible pattern. Davies' unease steadily grew, transforming into a gnawing suspicion. Another group of 3 stones, deliberately arranged in a triangular formation, caught his eye. Ahead, a patch of moss had been scraped from a tree trunk, revealing a lighter, almost luminous patch of bark, a stark contrast to the surrounding dark green. It was too consistent, too deliberate to be random. The pattern was emerging, like a secret code slowly revealing its meaning. He started to question their route, the planned trajectory that now felt increasingly ominous. The terrain itself seemed to be whispering a different story. Suddenly, a profound recognition clicked into place for Davies. He knew these markers. The specific nature of the warnings, the precise angle of the broken branch, the deliberate layering of the stones, even the way the moss had been disturbed, registered with him. He'd seen Thomas sketching similar patterns in his worn notebook during quiet moments, mapping out the nuanced language of the forest. Thomas had often talked about how nature left its own clues, its own signature. Davies remembered teasing him about it, calling it Thomas's secret language. This was Thomas's signature. It couldn't be anyone else. "Sergeant!" Davies called out, his voice sharper this time, carrying a newfound urgency. "These are Thomas's markings. He used to draw them, map out anomalies." The unit leader, initially skeptical, felt a jolt. He'd dismissed Thomas as a daydreamer, but Davies's conviction, and the increasing number of peculiar markers, began to penetrate his stubborn focus. As Davies articulated his growing suspicion, pointing out the accumulating evidence, the pattern became undeniable, too consistent for mere chance. The realization that Thomas, the rookie they had left behind, was somehow involved, shifted the dynamic of the entire unit. Their previous derision began to crumble, replaced by a confused apprehension. The man they had scoffed at was now speaking to them through the very earth beneath their feet. The unit halted, a crucial moment of indecision hanging heavy in the air. They stood at a crossroads, both literally and figuratively. Do they trust the rookie they had left behind, the quiet, unassuming Private Thomas, whose warnings were etched in stone and bark, or do they push forward into the mission they were given, guided by their orders and their own hardened experience? The weight of their lives, and perhaps the lives of many others, hung precariously in the balance. The forest around them, once just a path, now seemed to hold a silent, terrifying secret, whispered by the very man they had underestimated. The unit halted, a crucial moment of indecision hanging heavy in the air. They stood at a crossroads, both literally and figuratively. Do they trust the rookie they had left behind, the quiet, unassuming Private Thomas, whose warnings were etched in stone and bark, or do they push forward into the mission they were given, guided by their orders and their own hardened experience? The weight of their lives, and perhaps the lives of many others, hung precariously in the balance. The forest around them, once just a path, now seemed to hold a silent, terrifying secret, whispered by the very man they had underestimated. They were now truly at the cusp of the ambush zone. A low, guttural murmur, easily mistaken for the wind by an untrained ear, but undeniably human, drifted through the trees. It was the faint sound of multiple voices, hushed commands, the metallic clink of gear, the soft shuffle of many feet approaching from their left flank, exactly where Thomas's subtle warnings had indicated. Corporal Davies, his face pale with the dawning horror, frantically pointed to a freshly disturbed patch of earth, a clear boot print partially obscured by deliberately scattered leaves, and then to a series of 3 small, carefully stacked pebbles at the base of an ancient oak, the final, irrefutable markers left by Thomas, unmistakably communicating extreme danger and a specific direction. Sergeant Miller, a man whose life had been measured in battles fought and lives lost, finally comprehended the full, terrifying gravity of Thomas's silent message. The faint sounds, the undeniable pattern of the markers, the chilling precision of the warning, all coalesced into a single, stark realization. Thomas hadn't just spotted a threat, he had, with an almost unbelievable dedication, put himself in extreme, solitary danger. To warn them. The rookie who stayed behind, the quiet, unassuming private they had dismissed as too soft for combat, had, in fact, saved them from annihilation. A cold dread, quickly replaced by a profound surge of gratitude, washed over him. His unit, his men, had been walking blindfolded into a meticulously prepared slaughter, and it was Thomas, the one they mocked, who had ripped off the blindfold. Without a moment's hesitation, the unit, now fully understanding the peril, rapidly changed tactics. Miller's voice, usually a rasping command, was now a low, urgent whisper, cutting through the fear. "Fall back! Follow Davies! Move silent!" There was no room for questions, no time for doubt. They pivoted, using Thomas's implied path of warning, the opposite direction to the arrows, the clear ground where stones were absent, to find an alternative, safer route, away from the enemy's impending encirclement. Their retreat was not a panicked flight, but a controlled, tactical withdrawal, guided by the almost invisible breadcrumbs left by their unlikely savior. The plan was no longer to walk into the trap, but to either bypass it entirely or, if possible, prepare an ambush of their own, turning the tables on the enemy. They moved stealthily through a dense thicket, following Davies, whose eyes, now sharper than ever, traced Thomas's subtle cues. Peering through a gap in the foliage, they witnessed a chilling spectacle. Less than 100 yards away, the enemy forces, now clearly visible in the growing light, moved into the very position where Miller's unit would have been just moments ago. Enemy soldiers, dozens of them, meticulously set up machine gun nests, positioned snipers, and deployed flanking parties, forming a deadly crescent. It was a perfectly executed ambush, a masterpiece of battlefield strategy. The chilling confirmation of what Thomas had prevented sent shivers down their spines. Death had been waiting, patiently, silently, and Thomas had been its only witness, its only deterrent. With their own immediate danger averted, the unit's thoughts, heavy with a new kind of dread, now turned squarely to Thomas. Where was he? Had he escaped after meticulously laying his warnings, or had he fallen victim to the very enemy he sought to expose? Was he safe, hidden away, watching their retreat? Or had his quiet, courageous act cost him his life? His fate was unknown, a new, agonizing layer of tension added to the already strained atmosphere. The forest that had saved them now held the terrifying secret of Thomas's whereabouts and well-being. The earlier disdain for Thomas had completely evaporated, replaced by a profound and overwhelming respect and gratitude. The unit members, those who had once openly scoffed at his perceived inadequacy, now felt a deep sense of admiration and a gnawing concern for the private they had so grievously underestimated. Their contempt had been transformed into reverence, their mockery into a silent pledge to find him. The rookie who stayed behind had not just saved their lives, he had redefined their understanding of courage. The unit, now thoroughly shaken but alive, successfully evaded the enemy's trap, using Thomas's profound intelligence to their incredible advantage. They bypassed the main ambush point, navigating through a series of less guarded valleys and overgrown paths, eventually completing their primary reconnaissance mission with minimal casualties. This was a stark, undeniable contrast to the absolute annihilation that would have certainly occurred had they followed their original, now exposed route. The success of their mission, however, felt secondary, an afterthought almost overshadowed by the burning question of Thomas's fate. The very first priority. Upon completing their mission, or as soon as it was safe enough to deviate from their assigned objectives, became finding Thomas. Sergeant Miller called a halt, gathering his men. His voice, though still gruff, held a new, uncharacteristic reverence. "We're going back," he stated, his eyes sweeping across the grim faces of his soldiers. "We find Thomas." The unit, once so quick to dismiss and ridicule the quiet private, now treated his rescue as an absolute paramount mission, a solemn duty, a debt they had to repay. They meticulously retraced parts of his warning path, looking for any sign, any small, deliberate mark that might lead them to him, each man now keenly aware of the silent language Thomas had used to save them all. Every displaced stone, every bent branch, was now scrutinized with a desperate hope. They eventually found Thomas, not in a heroic stance, rifle ready, but slumped against the gnarled roots of an ancient, twisted oak tree, his face streaked with dirt and exhaustion, his uniform torn in several places. He wasn't wounded by enemy fire, but he was undeniably on the verge of collapse. His eyes, though weary, still held a flicker of that deep, contemplative spark. He had pushed himself beyond human limits, relying on sheer will and an almost feverish determination to complete his desperate task. The physical and mental toll of his solo mission was starkly evident in his trembling hands, his labored breathing, the hollow look in his eyes. He had given everything he had, and more, to warn them. The reunion was quiet, almost reverent, but deeply emotional. Sergeant Miller approached first, his helmet under his arm. He didn't speak, but extended a hand, helping Thomas to his feet. It was a silent nod of profound respect, a gesture that spoke volumes where words would have been inadequate. The other soldiers gathered around, their faces etched with gratitude and relief. There were no triumphant shouts, no backslapping, just quiet acts of assistance, offers of water and field rations, and an unspoken understanding that permeated the air. The earlier scorn, the casual cruelty, had been utterly obliterated, replaced by a deep, genuine camaraderie and an admiration that transcended rank and experience. Men who had once teased him now looked at him with something akin to awe. Thomas, ever humble, downplayed his actions, his voice hoarse. I saw it unfolding. Knew I had to do something. He stated he only did what was necessary, what anyone in his position would have done, a claim his unit knew to be utterly false. This humility, this quiet refusal to accept praise, further solidified his character in the eyes of his comrades. It wasn't about glory for Thomas, it was about saving lives. As Thomas slowly recovered, sharing a warm canteen and some hardtack, he recounted his detailed observations, the subtle shifts in patrol patterns, the specific sounds carried on the wind, the almost imperceptible signs of a large, well-organized force. He described the painstaking process of creating the warnings, explaining the meaning behind each specific marker, filling in the gaps for his unit about the true extent of the danger he had recognized and, by his singular effort, averted. He spoke not with bravado, but with the precise, methodical language of an observer who had seen the unseen. By the time they reached their own lines, Thomas was no longer the rookie who stayed behind. He was a hero, a vital, indispensable member of the unit who had, through his unique perception and undeniable courage, saved them all. His perceived weaknesses, his quiet nature, his meticulous attention to seemingly trivial details, his artistic bent, were now recognized as his greatest strengths, the very attributes that had allowed him to see what others could not, and to act decisively when others would have been lost. By the time they reached their own lines, Thomas was no longer the rookie who stayed behind. He was a hero, a vital, indispensable member of the unit who had, through his unique perception and undeniable courage, saved them all. His perceived weaknesses, his quiet nature, his meticulous attention to seemingly trivial details, his artistic bent, were now recognized as his greatest strengths, the very attributes that had allowed him to see what others could not, and to act decisively when others would have been lost. News of Thomas's extraordinary actions quickly spread beyond the confines of their immediate unit, whispered through the trenches and eventually reaching the ears of higher command. An official investigation, initially skeptical, confirmed the meticulous detail of his observations and the critical impact of his warnings. Thomas was formally recognized for his extraordinary actions, not with a fanfare of trumpets, but with a quiet commendation that spoke volumes. His perceived, trivial, skill, that deep, almost obsessive attention to the natural world and its subtle patterns, was now seen not as a distraction, but as an invaluable asset. His quiet determination, his keen observational prowess, and his unwavering commitment to his comrades became legendary within their ranks, a powerful testament to the often unconventional forms that true heroism could take. He was assigned to a specialized intelligence role, where his unique abilities could be fully utilized, his maps and observations becoming critical to future strategic movements. The unit, forever changed by the revelation of Thomas's quiet strength, continued their service on the Western Front, but with a profound, renewed understanding of each other's potential. The shared experience forged a deeper, unbreakable bond between them, a silent pact of respect and admiration. Thomas's story, the tale of the rookie who stayed behind and saved them all, became a powerful lesson woven into the fabric of military training, emphasizing that heroism truly comes in many forms, often from the most unexpected places. It taught them to look beyond the surface, to recognize that courage isn't always loud or obvious, but can reside in the quietest corners of a human soul. The story of the rookie who stayed behind was passed down through generations, echoed in hushed tones around campfires and whispered in the cold, dark confines of bunkers. It was not recounted as a tale of a naive, inexperienced soldier, but as the enduring legend of an incredibly perceptive and brave individual whose seemingly insignificant actions saved countless lives. He may not have fired a single shot in that particular crisis, his hands holding no smoking rifle, but his impact was monumental, a ripple effect that spread far beyond his immediate circle, ultimately influencing the outcome of critical engagements. His silent war had been won with observation, intellect, and an unwavering moral compass. He became a symbol, not of brute force, but of strategic thinking and the quiet power of an individual's unique contribution. The narrative reflects deeply on the very nature of heroism, illuminating the truth that it is often found in the most unexpected places, manifesting not always in bold charges and explosive valor, but in quiet acts of profound courage and meticulous dedication. It serves as a poignant reminder that we must look beyond superficial judgments, beyond the initial impressions, and strive to recognize the hidden strengths and untapped potential within every individual, regardless of their initial role or the world's perception of them. Thomas, the quiet observer, the artist at heart, had redefined what it meant to be a soldier, demonstrating that sometimes the greatest battles are won with the keenest eyes and the most thoughtful minds. His legacy was a testament to the fact that true courage isn't merely the absence of fear, but the unwavering commitment to act despite it, often in solitude and without expectation of glory. This story, like so many others hidden within the annals of history, offers a lasting impression about the true nature of courage, the indispensable power of intellect, and the invaluable contribution of every single person, no matter how small or overlooked their role might initially appear. It teaches us to value the quiet strength, the unseen effort, and the profound impact of those who operate outside the spotlight. Private Thomas, the rookie they laughed at, became the silent guardian, the unlikely hero whose legacy continues to inspire. If this incredible, untold story of quiet resilience and unexpected bravery moved you, please make sure to like this video, share it with others who appreciate the deep wells of human spirit, and subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories of courage and human resilience from the pages of history. We have many more tales of ordinary people achieving extraordinary feats, waiting to be rediscovered.